So the webinar has started. I'll just give it a minute or so to see if other committee members join us, or for community members to come into our virtual space, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, welcome everyone. This is a meeting of the Government Transition Advisory Committee Community Engagement Work Group. Today is Wednesday, June 7th, and we will be here from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Welcome to committee members and community members joining us tonight. My name is Julia Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Engagement and Community Participation Manager for the transition at the City of Portland. Zach was voluntold to help facilitate tonight's meeting. So at some point in a couple slides here, I'll turn it over to him. And just as a reminder, at the end of tonight's meeting, I'll be looking for another volunteer to facilitate our next meeting of this work group on June 26th. So maybe keep it in your mind and think about if you're willing and able to help out at the next meeting. Next slide, please. So I'm just gonna take a moment to go over some Zoom logistics. This meeting is being recorded. A copy of the recording will be posted on the transition website under past events, probably tomorrow, for anyone who wants to watch it. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning available. To access closed captioning, click on the CC button on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Committee members, please take this moment to change your chat settings to everyone. That way, not only committee members, but members of the public can follow along. And as a reminder, the chat is part of the public record and will be attached to the meeting summary of tonight's meeting. Community members listening in, we have the Q&A function open tonight. So you can submit questions, comments along the way as the committee is chatting. Those too become part of the public record and will travel with the meeting summary. And just as a reminder, we may not be able to always answer questions along the way, but we do read them and take them into consideration. At tonight's meeting, we are not taking verbal public comment, but as a reminder, public comment can be submitted at any time in writing, by email, through the transition website, by calling 311, or if you really want to give verbal public comment to the full committee, you can do so at the next available committee meeting, which is June 20th. Next slide, please. So just kind of to ground us again about what this work group is all about and where we're going. So the Community Engagement Work Group's primary purpose is to propose a transition-wide community engagement plan to the full Government Transition Advisory Committee for its consideration. Ultimately, as a reminder, it is the Chief Administrative Officer at the City of Portland, who is Mike Jordan, his responsibility to adopt a transition-wide community engagement plan for the city. This is the second of 3 proposed work group meetings. Obviously, we can change that if we need to. The idea was to have 2 meetings, this is the second, before you send a draft engagement plan to the full committee and before you present for the first time to the full committee, which you will do on June 20th. Then we would meet again as a work group for the 3rd time to sort of debrief that conversation with the full committee, make any revisions to the draft engagement plan that you all decide as a work group, and then maybe propose that revised engagement plan for the full committee to adopt at its July 10th meeting. Next slide, please. So just kind of quick overview of tonight's meeting. We need to approve the meeting summary from the May 24th work group meeting. I kind of just went over the purpose and the upcoming schedule. So there's really then, like, we want to talk briefly about the role of the Government Transition Advisory Committee, specifically in relationship to the community engagement efforts of the transition. And then we're going to talk about kind of how to engage community, when to engage community, and on what. And then there's a proposal for you all to discuss and consider about kind of the floor, I guess, creating a floor for committee members to engage. And then finally, we want to spend some time talking about how you all are going to present to the full committee on June 20th and what we need to do to sort of prepare for that presentation. And then we'll just conclude with next steps. Does that seem right? Getting some thumbs up, some head nods. So before I turn it to Zach, I sent out the May 24th meeting summary a week ago or so. Did folks have any changes or revisions that you wanted to suggest to the meeting summary? Can't see all of you, but I'm not hearing any. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the meeting summary?
I so move.
Second.
Anybody opposed? Okay, thank you for that. I will post those online tomorrow. I think with that, we'll move to the next slide and I will turn it over to Zach. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Hey, everybody. Good to see you all. Second night in a row. I just kind of let you know I'm operating on two screens. So I'm looking at you this way and I'm trying to make sure that I can get to my notes and stuff this way so that I'm looking directly on. But if you speak up, if I don't see hands, I should be able to see everybody. Anyway, thank you all for being here. Julia was mentioning we want to kind of refine our role and how we want to engage in this work, as well as we're advising the city and Michael Jordan about how the city would be engaging as well in its engagement strategy. So I want to start with just revisiting some of the reflections that we did from between now and our last meeting. So first of all, we asked ourselves to describe the role the Government Transition Advisory Committee should take, specifically in terms of the transitions education and engagement. And what you can see on screen is kind of the general themes that folks mentioned. In no particular order, they were to represent Portland voters and public interests, to provide technical advice to the city, to communicate with community, to educate community and voters, to solicit and store public input, to engage and support employees, to serve as project spokespeople, and to understand the project budget. So I guess we've all had a chance to potentially engage in this, but I wanted to raise this in this meeting platform. If there's any amendments or additions, like, is this the right direction? Does this kind of encapsulate the role as we see it for GTAC in terms of education and engagement? Are there other roles in there? Yeah, Juanita, I think you've unmuted. I'm gonna just.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have questions mainly. I don't think that I have any additional recommendations, but and the engaging support employees, I was wondering, do we have an idea about how we're going to be doing that? That would be for me, just for clarification. And then let's see, what is the other one? Yeah, no, and then providing technical advice to the city shouldn't be, I'm not so sure about the word technical in terms of, and then also will be to the, yeah, the city is fine. So that's all. Those are just kind of seeking clarification as to what do we mean by that.
Yeah, and I can, I think those are both really good questions, Lena. And I think that this is an aspirational list that doesn't necessarily spell out the how, but the what we want to try to accomplish. And then if we put this forward to the rest of the transition advisory committee, we can maybe think about the mechanism to doing that, whether it's like through a work group or a subcommittee that would engage directly with employees, whether it's through our engagement and participation in the city council's work group, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, the technical advice to the city is one that maybe a broader community could respond to. And I see Leah's hand, so I'm going to pass it to you, Leah.
Mhm.
Mine's about something outside of technical advice. So continue with this. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah. It would be nice, since this is a plan, this is an engagement plan, it would be nice that as we finalize the plan, that although it is aspirational, that we give some idea about how do we mean to do these things. So again, so we became accountable for the work that we're supposed to do. That was I was coming from that perspective when I was reading them, and I had the questions about provide technical advice and the engagement of the employees. And I appreciate, thank you for your clarification. It makes sense regarding the engage and support employees. Yeah, that we can add some ideas as to how that can be done.
Terry, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of on this topic. I think it's important to try and recognize that the GTAC has this advisory role, independent and separate from our engagement role. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those are going to be in tension. And Mark in the Q&A sort of brings that up. We are to solicit and store public input and amplify things as we deem fit. I think our judgment as a GTAC committee giving advice is going to be in tension with being a spokesperson for the transition on things that we might not quite agree with, not be 100%. So I think this, the stuff here that's on the chart is fine. But as long as we understand that, representing Portland voters and public interests, providing advice, our roles of GTAC that we're going to want to protect as a GTAC. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. And thanks to Mark for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you for bringing attention. Still getting familiar with the whole Zoom Q&A function, but Mark, thank you for your comment. And I'm going to table that comment and maybe any kind of revisions of how we want to think about these bullet points and our goals till after we hear from Leah. Leah, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Zach. And I'll piggyback a bit on what Terry said. Thank you, Mark, for what you put in there. The points that I wanted to bring up were the third bullet point, communicate with community, seems a little bit so broad to me that it's a little bit meaningless in there. And I think it's actually covered by a lot of the other points that are more specific in terms of what type of communication we're looking to do, especially if we incorporate Mark's suggestion in there in terms of being more specific about what we do when we solicit input, soliciting it and then amplifying it. I think makes more sense to me to spell out that that's what it means to communicate, is to talk to people and then share their concerns. So yeah, my recommendation is just that the third bullet point is not necessarily useful and is a little bit too broad.
Okay, great. We're getting Destiny on. Welcome. Hi. Had a lot of travel today. Okay, I think we've got Jane, you've got your hand up.
Thanks so very much, Zach. I think that just because we're talking about it and we could probably nail it right now, is that I don't think our job is to provide technical advice to the city. I think this particular small working group skill set, I mean, the reason that we all said that we wanted to be a part of this is that we've had experience doing this in some format before. And I think our advice is to the city's communications and community outreach team, that because we have knowledge and experience. So when that is proposed, then I think our role here is to say, that's fabulous, but did you think about this? And I think that that's why we're a subcommittee, because we all signed up because we like this kind of work. So, and maybe that is technical advice, but I think it needs to be a little bit clearer. And I think if I was a GTAC member that was not on this committee, that would help. It would be, oh, these are the folks who like community outreach and listening to people. So they're the ones that are going to really kind of focus on this plan.
Thanks, Jane. And maybe Julia, you can correct me if I'm mistaken in this, but we're going to be potentially recording these kinds of roles, or the roles for engagement and education to GTAC more broadly. So this is, while we're talking as a work group, we're really trying to propose to the broader GTAC community what we should be doing when it comes to education and engagement. And so we will, in all likelihood, people not in this meeting circle have an opportunity and desire, honestly, to provide technical advice to the city that's outside of the kind of like role of how the city just engages with the community writ large.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I actually want to pause and ask Julia a question, if that's okay for the group. With this list, how much should we be belaboring wording as much as it's okay? So I think this is representative of how we might want to present to the broader group when we're looking at our next meeting, when we're presenting the engagement strategy. I've documented here some of the kind of like ideas, including it was Mark, I believe, and those that were amplified by Terry and Leah. Thank you for that kind of clarification and edit to the, what is that, 5th bullet point. And then I think we can, give some better definition of technical advice for the broader community, or for the broader advisory committee. Yeah, Julia, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. I'll just take the opportunity now, but this will be true kind of for all of tonight's conversation. I am going to do the best that I can to capture the conversations that this work group has had in the draft community engagement plan, right, which you all have access to. And maybe at the end of tonight's meeting, I'll take some like drafting volunteers, should I have any. But right, so the idea, I'm not going to go on and on about what's on this slide, right? But as you kind of come to agreement as a group, I'm putting that language into the plan that ultimately will go as a draft to the full committee next week. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Julia. Jose? Oh, you're on mute, unfortunately. Sorry.
And I think we've all agreed that it should be added in, but Mark's suggestion about amplify, I really want to stress how important that one little piece is, just because this is very talk to the community and like get their support, but nothing says we'll listen. Like that's the only thing that adding that in says that we're listening and we're going to take your ideas. And I think it's really important that something to that effect is added.
Great. So I think onus on us as the work group in our revision of the next draft and or in helping kind of actively with editing the drafts, that we will incorporate that reflection into the working document that we'll present to the broader advisory committee. Thanks for that. I appreciate the emphasis. I want to go to the next slide because I'm conscious of time and I don't want to waste too much time, because I'm going to get a proposal in front of us, which will probably have a lot of conversation. So this slide, if you recall last work group meeting, I actually volunteered to draft some questions that we might want to ask communities when we engage. There were generally two kind of sets of questions. One, how the community wishes to be engaged, and two, when they want to be engaged. We were kind of thinking about like sequencing and making sure that our engagement aligns with some of the happenings and milestones going on within the transition, right? And so in terms of how to engage, Julia has shared with me that during the charter review, the Charter Commission, in partnership with the Coalition of Communities in Color, they conducted a multilingual lingual survey in fall 2021, which focused on civic engagement and how respondents wanted to engage in charter review. And so this slide, which is very wordy, I apologize, but it kind of highlights some of the insights the city shared with us from that survey. So, just for those listening in, there were more than 1,000 responses. Less than a third indicated that they were somewhat comfortable interacting with the city, and 1 in 10 said that they were extremely uncomfortable interacting with the city, which again puts onus on us as an advisory and public body to help with that interaction. I think there's interesting insights from the outlets from which respondents obtained information about community events and activities. So about a quarter typically obtain that information from social media, 15% from newspapers, and you can see community-based organization email lists, 11.4%, community bulletin boards, 7.5%. And they also provided some recommendations for improving accessibility, which we should keep in mind, but also ensure that the city has this modeled within their community engagement strategy. And that's hosting events at various times of the day, including evenings and weekends. We've seen that reflected in some of the public input opportunities from the independent commissions, which is great to see. But offering language interpretation, providing skilled facilitators who are trusted members of the community, making intentions clear, building trust with the community, providing more opportunities for the community to engage in open dialogue. And within that, there was general ideas of and desires of being in small or medium-sized groups with that engagement. So those are things to keep in mind when we're maybe identifying and reaching out to communities and trying to have a robust engagement strategy. Any comments on this slide before I move to the next one? Amy, I think go ahead.
I'm wondering what was included in the social media thing, because I was looking around on poking around on social media like Facebook and Instagram, trying to figure out kind of where discourse is happening right now. And the most people I saw were on Reddit, or Reddit was a big one, and TikTok. Were those included in the social media, or did we know that?
Julia might be able to answer that.
Let me just make sure I understand, Amy. So your question is not about these survey responses. Your question is about during charter review, how did the city or the charter commission engage community through social media?
I think it was about grouping.
What social media means, what platforms that includes.
Oh, in the survey.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look at the survey instrument, but I'm happy to do that. It might have just been social media without definition, but I can double check.
Yeah, because I feel like that's worth factoring in. The social media isn't the monolith it once was, and it's worth it for us to consider how that affects our work. And also, traditional media isn't like included, like is newspaper included with traditional media like KGW and stuff like that?
I had not seen this initial survey tool for 2 years. My guess is it was on here and didn't rise to enough responses to be included in the report out. But like I said, I'm happy to go back and pull the survey tool itself.
Could we, may I make a proposal that we have that survey instrument into this? I think Jane was calling it a wheelbarrow of.
My wheelbarrow.
Yeah, I liked that. It was a very descriptive way of talking about the trove of detail and information that we've gotten from you. That would be really helpful.
Absolutely.
Great. All right, Leah, you got your hand up. I think you were next.
Yeah, I'll keep this simple because similar to what Amy was asking about, I think I was looking for more nuance on what we mean by social media and newspaper and whether the two of those are actually the same thing. Like, are people actually scrolling through social media feeds and clicking on a random thing? And also when we say social media, does the city actually engage with social media, or is that us relying on various different community groups posting things through their networks for it? I guess that's an actual question I have, because I don't engage with City of Portland social media, I should say. Is there an active presence?
I'm happy to take this. Sort of, I guess, is my best response. I mean, I think one of the many consequences of a commission form of government is non-unified social media. Right. So I can't speak so much to Bureau specific social media, but I understand that it happens, right? Like the Portland Bureau of Transportation, I believe, has its own social media channels, right? Probably Portland Parks and Rec does. Does every bureau? Probably not. But to the larger, more like outward facing ones, yeah, I think so. Council offices have their own. One of the efforts the city has been undergoing in the last couple of years is the creation of more unified communications, including unified social media channels. And we did use those during charter review, and we've been using them during the transition. And it's just City of Portland. I don't know, I'd have to get you the handles, but yes, but it's relatively new. So the reach is relatively small, but growing.
And so from that, it seems like for our group, it might be useful that when we're thinking about social media, we think about that as another way to use partners rather than get things out through our channels. And then.
Yeah, I can tell that there's a lot of expertise in this room with the astute questions. Thank you for that, Leah. And Jane, you have your hand up.
Yeah, very, very briefly. I'm excited to see the survey and to see whether or not it's actually scientifically supportable, which I'm sure the city would not do anything that wasn't scientifically supportable. But from years and years of doing survey work, because I worked at the port at the airport, and I was responsible for all of the survey work of customers and airlines and travelers and all of that kind of a deal, is that when you ask people how they typically obtain information, they often just speak from the top of their head. So this isn't really weighted. It's only weighted because a lot of people said, I use social media. Well, they use social media if they're looking to see when the Saturday market is going to open up. But typically for information like city activities, probably not so much. So one of the things that I do encourage us to do is that it's going to be extremely costly and hard work to do social media, other than to feed it, as Leah smartly said, is to our partners. But I encourage us to already interact with organizations that are already there. You know, I have a really wonderful neighborhood association. I get fabulous information from them. I engage with them. You know, if you're an Asian or Pacific Islander, you probably belong to an organization. So I suggest that we look at the information, but we don't get too worried with the percentages.
Yeah, I think that's right, Jane. And it's food for thought, and clearly we're pretty hungry. So I'm going to have us move to the next slide, because I want to again reserve as much time as we can about this proposal. So this is kind of the second piece of this, like how and when to engage. So we had, as part of this, also it asks work group input and prioritizing what aspects of the transition the community needs or wants to be engaged in. And so this kind of chart that you see below in blue, that's what reflects our responses. So we generally agreed that prioritizing voter education, districting was most important, that council operations and how council conducts businesses and the roles of the council president and VP, the role and responsibility of the city administrator, the city's recruitment, the organizational structure, the budgeting process, those kind of fell in the middle and like kind of second to voter education districting. And then we had facility improvements, code review, administration of ranked choice voting, least among these areas. And I just want to re-emphasize, these are all pretty all important on their own right, but we had kind of the difficult task of thinking about the prioritization of these, I think 14 different points. So this is the reflection of our work. There were a couple of areas where there were discrepancies, and I don't think we need to belabor this point too much, but I just wanted to flag it. Future service delivery improvements, salaries of elected officials, those two, we had some, I wouldn't say conflicts, but there were some differences and discrepancies across people who submitted. So Terry, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, based on last night's meeting, there's a big city contract for voter education, which I guess if you lump voter education and districting together as the same thing or a similar thing, that's going to be where the action is. And if we're talking about the role of GTAC in this sort of stuff, I think we might be taking the lead on what we have categorized as the middle category, because there isn't going to be a big contract for engagement on that sort of stuff. So I'm not sure if I'm thinking about that correctly in terms of Julia's report and role as the transition engagement. That might be different from GTAC's engagement, but I just wanted to point that out. Not sure what to do with that.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point, Terry, and I think it's also clear to us from our meeting yesterday that even with the amplified resources, there's always a need for more and more capacity in these spaces. And so, I think even in a space where we might be prioritizing, say, thinking about council operations, we should probably also be ensuring that there's constant repetition about voter education, about districting, that kind of thing. But your point is absolutely on point. Juanita, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I was going to make the same comment that was made by Terry, in the sense that in terms of how do we align our engagement with the transition timeline based on those contracts that are going to be given out. We need to know, because they're supposed to be producing the materials that are going to be needed to make presentations, to educational materials, all of those things. So that will be, to me, very critical that we have a good understanding about timelines for when the deliverables for those contracts are taking place, so we can align our work plan along with that, because those are tools that we're going to need.
That's a great point, Juanita. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Leah, you've got your hand up as well.
I do. Sorry, I feel like I'm taking a lot of space this evening. Real quick. Also from last night, one thing that I think might be missing from this list that we could consider adding is candidate education. As we talked about, which they're voters too, but again, wanting to make sure that we're casting a wide net in terms of who could potentially run and fill these voids. It'd be great to have that in there somewhere.
Yeah, I agree, Leah, in the sense that I felt a little bit uncomfortable when I read the plan, the transition plan, that it was like just assuming that, well, they're running for office, so they have an interest. I felt a little bit uncomfortable with that, because I felt like we were kind of dumping the responsibility into a group that we don't know, we don't know how well do even them understand what is all of these changes are going to be impacting the way they're going to be running for office. So thank you, Leah.
Julia, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I put this in the chat as well, but I'll just call attention to it. And I believe Shoshana said this at the full committee meeting last night. And to Terry, like, I think Terry's point is interesting. And I just want to remind folks that currently the way that the city is thinking about voter education is with this three-pronged approach. The first approach is sort of broad-based public education, utilizing government channels through partnership between the city and the counties who administer elections and have been doing voter education for a long time. The second prong is educating candidates, because candidates talk to a lot of voters. And the city's auditor's office already does candidate education. So how do we build on that candidate education program to include ranked choice voting, district-based elections stuff? And then the third prong is voter education in unison with prong 1 and 2 that is delivered by community to reach harder to reach voters that are unlikely to be reached as well or effectively through prong 1 and 2. Sorry about the prong references. So I think, like, Terry's absolutely right that part of, like, prong 3 is the only one covered by contract, and it's not fully covered, right? Because there has to be that sort of connectivity across the prongs, like there needs to be unified messaging, right? There needs to be like ways that we're all talking about this together. And then just to bring in like Leah's point and Juanita's point, right? Like, candidate education is a crucial component of the three-prong approach that very much needs to be developed and built out collectively across the city. Thanks.
Thank you, Julia. Amy, your hand's raised.
This might be going too much, but just a comment on the candidate education. As somebody who was in campaigns and consulting, is there going to be an effort to include like the broader political establishment? Like, what is that going to look like? Because the way I kind of see this playing out in my mind is that the political consultants that have money and have the resources to learn are going to learn. And they're going to advise the candidates that they want to put in place. And then everybody else is just left behind and doesn't know how to run for office. So how are we going to be building in that reality that like the political establishment is both our ally, but also they're going to be a barrier to broader candidates entering the race? But that might come down the line. But just want to say that, which is that how do we protect this from kind of the sharks?
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. And I also want to just like acknowledge the reality that two words are kind of difficult to translate into candidate education. But just to provide the full text that we had when we were ranking these and thinking about them in context, it was how council conducts business and like some of the roles within council, which I do think play into, this candidate education piece of it. I, of course, have not run or anything, so I may be a little bit naive into thinking about all the different elements to be considered, but it might be an umbrella concepts that captures a lot of these like component parts. I wanted to, I guess, take a step back though from this conversation and just say, I think there are opportunities where we can highlight certain elements and certain of these like priorities when it's most appropriate, so that we can, for example, prioritize engagement around districting up until the point where we have a final vote in September. Like, obviously that's going to be really important from an engagement timeline standpoint. And so I have a proposal that we can help in a way that we can be focused in our contribution and assisting Julia in writing this. So if you and I apologize, I didn't give you fair warning, but if you had a chance to look at the version 2 communication strategy, there is a calendar that is a 2-column calendar, and it kind of outlines the milestones and landmarks of what's going on in the transition, and then it's like what GTAC is doing or something along those lines. And I would actually think we could add a 3rd column to this where we can populate some of these what we who we want to prioritize and when, so that we can think about from our engagement, say we're in the 2nd quarter, or let's say the 3rd quarter of 2023, we should be prioritizing districting, maybe even salaries, right? For because these are opportunities for people to engage, to uplift and put input, to amplify what the community wants in this transition. And so this is kind of getting to the brass tacks, I think, of what we're wanting in specificity of tell us what we should be asking, and then we can be focused about how we want to shape those questions so that we can kind of be uniform as a body in asking questions of the community in all the different spaces that we're going to be existing in. Is that a proposal that anybody is interested in as a idea? And if so, would anybody be interested in helping with that? Yeah, Destiny.
Thank you, Zach. I think from yesterday's meeting, they're really only taking public comment and feedback for the next month and a half. And so that would, their request was sign up to help us get that feedback. I think that's already kind of underway, because after that they vote and it's finalized. I think we would just then be equipped to, other than support them with what they have right now set up, once they conclude their committee work, be informed to answer the questions community has after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. And I do think, the timing of this community engagement strategy for GTAC is kind of it's happening in the process of all of this engagement that needs to be happening, right? We know this, we've kind of started a little bit late in this process, but I do think that we will be able to lean in on the independent commissions and developing questions so that when we go to these public hearings, so that when we have our individual outreach, we're equipped to have those conversations immediately and prioritize, like you're saying, Destiny, we need to get input from the community on districting. We need that from salaries. Those things are going to be voted on pretty quick. And we're going to get this engagement strategy, I think, finalized and approved in July, but we're going to be getting the draft in front of the rest of our advisory committee in a week or two. And so it will give at least an opportunity for the rest of our advisory committee to think about what questions they can be asking and how they can be engaged when they're getting engaged, even if it's not prescribed as a working agreement or that one was for you, Derry. But even if it wasn't kind of outlined as a specific role that we as a committee need to perform. So I'm going to re-elevate this idea of helping Julia, and honestly, I will put myself out there. I'm happy to work in this space as well. I'm on kind of being targeted in helping us as a committee know what things we want to prioritize in our engagement, and putting this into a calendar form so that we can kind of think about, okay, I'm going to see, Apano this month. Here are the things that I would like to be asking of them and how to engage, for example. Jane, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea and I would be delighted to help too.
Great. Thanks, Jane. Destiny?
I'm I'm a little like lost, so just help me clarify. I like, from my understanding, I don't know why we would ask our own GTAC committee for questions that we want asked about redistricting. I feel like we should get those questions that redistricting has, that they have, because it's their work, and then we go out to community, you know, and support that facilitation, because we're not deciding, that's an autonomous committee. Like, we do not interfere, but we can support as the engagement body.
I thank you for that clarification. I'm sorry to have caused confusion. I do think that there are troves of experts that we can lean on in developing questions. So thinking about districting, we should absolutely be leaning in on our independent commission to help us with formulating questions that we can be asking communities. But I do think it would be helpful if we had a shared language of what we need to be asking to then be able to kind of receive that input and then amplify it.
Thank you. Yes, I agree.
Okay. So Jane and I will work on this, but I also would maybe say that as a homework assignment for ourselves, similar to what we did between our last work groups, we'll share this with the broader group and welcome any feedback. I think what we'll do, you know, with some of these certain questions and priority areas, right? We'll make sure to connect with like the districting commission so that we can get those questions kind of fleshed out into how they would want to be asked. But I think for a lot of these others, there's not any specific rule book, and so getting your input, your ideas, how to refine it to get the best, clearest input, it would be really, really useful. Because I know there's a lot of talented wordsmithing in this room. So, okay, I think that's one action item for us. I want to go to the next slide and put forward a larger proposal that we would include into this like document as the specific role, clarifying the specific role for GTAC. So this, you know, many of you noted that inviting people to city hosted education and engagement opportunities is less likely to reach hard to reach communities, and that in order to reach these communities, the community needs to go out into the community and engage. So this proposal, I worked with Julia on it, is a kind of a suggestion of, we can kind of tease out, right, make modifications, but a way of committing our committee to doing the necessary engagement that we want to get, you know, soliciting input, advising the city, but also getting information out into the community for voter education and for all the great reasons that we've kind of enumerated earlier in this meeting. So just I'll read it out. The proposal is that every 3 months, every quarter, beginning in June, committee members in pairs will provide at least 2 education or engagement opportunities in community beyond city hosted events. And at least one of these opportunities must be targeted to reach a community or communities historically left out of City Hall decision making, which we have discussed, I think, in our last work group meeting, right? So we have those communities identified that we could provide to the GTAC community committee at large. But any thoughts on this proposal? Suggestions for revision? Is this like reasonable? I'm curious for your input. Destiny.
For committee members, does that mean the whole entire GTAC committee, or are we just limiting it to this work group that we're involved in?
Whole entire GTAC. Yep.
Great. And then a second one, I'm just a little concerned about at least one of those being towards our communities that have been marginally left out, just because, you know, we need a lot of trauma informed and racially equity trained people to do this. And, you know, I don't know everyone here that well. I'm just hesitant that some might not have that training. And being a part of these spaces, I would like to ensure that we don't sow distrust or offend community when we go out there. So I would just be a little hesitant. I don't know if we have any trainings, but I do want to call that out right now.
Definitely great flag, Destiny. Thank you for raising that. Juanita.
Yeah, I just think that Destiny, that you comment, I really appreciate it. And I was wondering about that when we were asked to put a list of organizations that we know. And I was wondering, how do we are going to divide those, because there's a lot of them. And so that maybe we can think about that process based on your comment. I think that makes a lot of sense. The other thing is that, well, and I just want to comment that I like the proposal, is very reasonable. And I just think it's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Juanita. Jose?
Yeah, I really like the idea of this, but I also want to super back up what Destiny said and also add to that often people of color, when paired with a white person, are expected to do a lot of labor to explain a lot of things to the white person they're paired with. So we might want to think about that, and it's fine. A lot of us are willing to do that, but you only have so many spoons. So there might be a consideration by doing pairs for different things. Like maybe it'd be better for like Destiny, Juanita, and I to work together to hit up the Latinx groups, you know, because we're going to be better received, and because probably a few of us speak Spanish and it's going to be easier, right? Just something to keep in mind. I don't necessarily want to make people feel bad, but I also don't want to spend the whole time like being like the designated Hispanic in the group.
Right. Yeah, that.
So
Yeah, I don't want to be I don't know another way of saying, like, kind of pigeonholing. Yeah, like, this is intended also to like be a way of ensuring that we have that engagement too. Yeah.
And I think part of my concern is I think David might be our only Black member, I think. So I'm afraid like David might get tasked with a lot of stuff to do that, and like at least there's like more of us Latinx people here. So, but we have to be careful of how we're reaching out to groups. So.
Thanks, Jose. Destiny, you've got your hand up.
And just kind of going off of what Jose said, I don't think that we need to silo based on our identity. I think there's clear allyship. Again, this is based on, I don't know everybody's, you know, racial justice and equity training. I think, you know, helping to support a meeting is great. And, you know, people, I don't know, the word that I can only think of right now because I'm really tired is kind of like, you know, shadowing, like going to a meeting if you're really interested in like hearing feedback, but maybe not leading facilitations. I think that's great as like an opportunity of personal growth. But again, you know, there are places for allyship, and there's some, you know, a lot of people I hope here have trauma informed or like have that racial justice and equity training to support. So like Jose pointed out, David isn't overwhelmed, or someone else who has a different identity is overwhelmed by taking it on solo. I think that pairs are great, but we also need to be aware of how we're using pairs and what community space we're taking, because we're entering community space, right? We're the guests, and we always want to be welcoming and hospitable and respectful.
I agree. I think so. There's been kind of some suggestion. I'm gonna table what I was gonna say. Terry, your hand's raised.
I just wanted to back up a little bit, just be more general. I'm assuming these are kind of like a roadshow thing where we'll have some of it scripted with topics to discuss and kind of packaged for us. Well, for GTAC members, maybe we're the ones doing the packaging, this work group. But I'm assuming that's what we're talking about, some structure to it and some prep and some outlines to work from, fact sheets to discuss, those sorts of things. Is that assumption fair? Or Are we gonna make it up as we go?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair assumption. That's partly why I would like, I think, to have structured questions, right, that we can have as that structure. But you know, each community might be different, right? So we've got to be a little bit flexible in this space. And I also, just like as a quick aside, just for further clarification with this proposal, this is not strictly our proactive outreach. This is also inclusive of reactive. You know, if for example, I don't know, Verde reached out to us and wanted us to have a meeting, like that can be considered as part of this like quota, if you will. So in that case, it would be, you know, that they're inviting us, they probably have a specific interest of a topic in mind, may not necessarily, but there's an opportunity there to augment our outreach from a reactive way as well. Yeah, Jose, your hand's up.
Just actually a point of order question. Are reserve alternates allowed to serve on these committees? The subcommittees, Julia? Because I thought they were. I asked this because I see that Bill left a Q&A question. And I'm surprised he's not allowed in here.
He is in here.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Yeah, he is in here. He joined as an attendee. I just promoted him. I didn't see him at first. I sent him an apology. Of course. Anytime,
Okay.
always.
Okay,
But
thank you.
Thank you for calling it out.
Thanks for being my eyes, Jose. I'm sorry. The Q&A and some of the comments and chat space is kind of challenging to navigate while facilitating. So please, if there's anything like that, just I don't know how to get, like, wave your hands or something. I don't know. I can usually see that. What, Juanita?
Yeah, just really quickly. Yeah, because I just want to agree that we don't want to silo ourselves into a specific group. You know, I think that it's important that we share with other people. That I like the idea of partner with two people, and it's fine. I have worked with my experience. I agree also that that is probably good to do a little bit of training, just to people who may feel sometimes I may feel uncomfortable about something, and it's good to talk about it in a group and find tools that I can use. And so and I just want to share with the group that I have worked with Native American communities, with African American communities, with Asian communities, with Latino communities, immigrant communities. So, and generally, people, what they want is respect. You know, if they're treated with respect, I think that takes care of a lot of the issues. But anyway, so I just want to say that, but thank you.
Thanks, Juanita. Yeah, and maybe. Right. Just to quickly respond to that, I think Julia mentions reaching out to Office of Equity about trainings. I think that's a really, really good idea, a great resource. And maybe we like have, I'm gonna laugh about this, Terry, but like some kind of like code of ethics or like agreements or some kind of way of like knowing, just to like ensure that there's an ethos and a mentality in going into these. Like I just want to flag that as maybe something that we can contribute into this space of like, here's a proposal and this is the like mindset that you should go into these. So kind of as like a way of opening up that conversation. William, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Zach. I'm a reserve alternate, so thank you for allowing me to speak. I want to make a comment, you know, on this proposal. If we wanted to pursue it, I'd recommend also putting an end time by which one would, you know, provide the educational opportunities. That would just make us conscious of the time frame within which we're working.
Yeah, Yeah, let me ask a clarification. Are you asking of a time frame for each of these like specific kind of priorities, or the time frame of like the communication and engagement writ large, the responsibility, or?
Oh, Zach, I was thinking, now it reads that, oh, I missed the every 3 months. So I guess I can read this to mean that there will be, one would endeavor to provide 2 opportunities every quarter year. Would I be reading that correctly?
That's right. That's the proposal, right?
Okay, I did not catch the every 3 months. So that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So we've had a lot of good dialogue. No suggested revisions to this point. I'm curious, does anybody like feel strongly that it should be, I don't know. It sounded like there was positive insight about having pairs. I just think that generally gives people a little bit more like comfort. But having 2 versus 3, or having this be every 3 months, like there are many ways of piecemealing this out and editing it. And is simply a proposal and kind of the first draft, but if we like it, then we like it. I just want to give an opportunity for folks to maybe weigh in if they want to make revisions. Yeah, Leah.
Thank you for this. I love this proposal. I'm excited for it. I think pairs makes total sense and is very realistic for getting the work done. And thank you to Juanita, Jose, Destiny, for like flagging the last sentence as something that we all need to consider. And I want to make just a recommendation there. I want to make sure it doesn't get lost, like all of that conversation. We just move forward with it and assume like it's all going to be fine. We're just going to take an equity training. And say, if we're going to say at least 1, which I agree, we need to be making sure that we're like focusing on communities that have been historically left out. But instead of saying targeted, could we change the language to say at least 1 of these opportunities will be provided in partnership with like communities that have been historically left out of City Hall decision making, acknowledging that perhaps this group and all the people in it aren't the right ones to lead this. And that as a part of this process, we want to be inviting people into it, not just constantly telling them what's happening.
I like that. I don't know if we have to go Robert's rules with having motions and everything as a work group, but does anybody feel like they would like that change? Do we want to do a motion just in case? I'm getting thumbs up. I'm getting consensus. I'm going to just go with that from that. So let's make that change. I think that's really spot on, and in my opinion, representative of the conversation that we've heard, especially if we can wrap it around with some resources like training and things that may not necessarily be, well, I mean, I guess that's another question. Do we want to have within this proposal a requirement to do any kind of equity training, or maybe we wait and see on whether those resources are available to us? Destiny.
I think that we should kind of have a require for equity training. I mean, the whole point of this new government transition is because of equity and the inequities in the Portland government. And so I don't know how you could serve a part of this committee and not have at least some training on that if we're supposed to move this forward. And so I don't think it should be optional. I think everyone should have to be a little bit more equitable and trained to do so. And so I do think it should be written, especially if we're going to say we're going to partner with, communities of color, historically marginalized communities in partnership. And, when we talk about in partnership, this is the city. They are residents and citizens and voting and things like that. And so they're not an other, they're within us, right? They're our community. Whether or not you're racially aware or equitable, that's a different thing, right? But that's why I think we should have these trainings. I don't think it should be optional. And that's my motion to add.
Great. I can't second as a facilitator, I guess.
Second.
Okay.
Oh, second.
All
I
right.
second that.
Does anybody feel, are there any objections or anybody who feels like this shouldn't be added?
I think it's comments, if anyone has
Or
comments.
comments, thank you, yeah. It's been a while. Okay, great. So let's add a second, or let's add a, what would that be, the third sentence, that the City of Portland Office of Equity and Human Rights will provide training, I don't know, like training to, we don't have to get into the nuts and bolts, great. Okay, Julia will wordsmith it, but this is excellent. I'm really pleased that we're moving in this direction. I think it gives us a lot of clarity as a role. Another testament of how successful this work group has been. I'm running behind, so I'm going to jump to the next slide so that we can prepare for our GTAC meeting on 6/20. Great. Sorry, I am realizing I have two different slides. Okay, so we need to kind of prepare. So I've got kind of 3 questions for us to consider and hopefully answer in a timely manner. So what are the questions? Let's see. So what questions should we be asking GTAC to consider in sharing these materials? And this is an opportunity for us to kind of stage the conversation with the advance notice of providing the draft community engagement, this proposal as well. Are there any questions that we want to include in this kind of communication? I don't necessarily know if that was a really coherent question, but are there any, how do we want to, like, I guess, pre-present this to GTAC before we have time to present, if that makes any more sense? Terry.
Let me try and maybe ask what the status of the engagement plan is at this point. Like, this would be the draft that we've seen, edited minorly based on some of our discussions, and that's the draft. And then we, the engagement work group, support it. That's the basic fundamental procedural thing that we would be doing, right?
Yeah, I think Julia has a response to that, but oh, no, I think that is correct.
Sorry, yeah, I think maybe he was going somewhere broader, just from a really practical standpoint. Like I mentioned earlier, so you all have a draft engagement plan, right? A lot of it, the whole sort of intro part is that community engagement framework that came out of one-on-one conversations with everybody on GTAC. So that part will all be familiar. And then there's sort of, here are the areas of the transition, here are the types of engagement tactics, here are some projected engagement numbers. I will revise the role of GTAC based on tonight's conversation. Side note, if anybody wants to help draft or look at my draft, like, I welcome that. And then it's this like long calendar, right, of here's what we think all the like public meetings are of the public bodies, here's other engagement, and then the folks who have volunteered to populate. We will definitely be sending that entire thing to the full committee on June 13th, a week before the June 20th meeting. But I think we can also, when we send that out, make asks of the committee, or like sort of tee things up for them to be considering that we think maybe are the most fruitful areas to have like full committee conversation on the 20th versus like, here's a 20-page plan. What do you think? You know what I mean? And sorry, I don't know if that's where you were going, Zach, but that would be helpful, I think, for me.
It was exactly where I was going in a much clearer way of explaining it. So thank you for stepping in that way. So I guess question to the rest of our work group, are there any additional materials or yeah, Destiny?
I feel like, for me, when we talk, we're bringing consensus, we're kind of similar mindset. I think when we present, it would be a great space to say, are we missing something? Like, because right there, many mindsets bring great ideas. So I would definitely take the time for the committee at large to let us know, is there an organization we're missing? Is there a form of communication we're missing? Is there, a topic that should be highlighted a certain way? Just take that time to get everyone at large to give us any, identify any blind spots.
Great. Juanita, I think you were next,
Yes.
or yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, I think, is it possible to, when we submit the draft, of course, after all of this conversation, I think we have had a very productive discussion today, we've given enough information to Julia. When we submit the draft to the full committee, can we include with them the questions, Julia? It was very helpful when you send us the slides and you ask questions of us, like, what do you think we're missing? Just like Destiny was commenting on it. So it would be good to give them some guidance as to what we want from them. And that way, when they read in the document, they will be thinking of those questions. And when we meet on the 20th, they will be prepared to give us feedback, rather than asking them during the meeting after they receive this 20-page document, what are we missing? So that way they will have time to prepare.
Thanks, Juanita.
You're welcome.
Jose?
A material that might be helpful, well, it would be helpful to me, so I guess I will volunteer to make this if it's allowed to be made. But having a Google Calendar with every date of everything that's happening would be very helpful, because we have all these lists of like all the public hearings here, and then our meetings somewhere else, and then the work group meetings are like other dates, and just having a calendar that you can click on and it opens up a Google Calendar that shows everything in different colors, whether it's mandatory or optional. I don't know if we're allowed to have Google Calendars as part of the stuff we work with. And yeah, with like the location, all the information that we could do, would need about it. If it's like a Zoom link as we get them, things like that, that would be super helpful, because then if you find you have time to just be at a public meeting last minute, you could look and see if there's something there. And I will volunteer with help compiling those dates, but I will volunteer to make that if that's a thing people think would be helpful.
Seeing nods of heads, I personally am nodding my head. I would find that very helpful, to have it in a digital form that's easily transferable into my own personal calendar. Sorry for the cat. Destiny.
I agree. And also, like, the city of Portland, like, it's great to have the GTAC website with the, meetings and links, but like, it's hard for me to share that and engage that with like other community members, right? And so I feel like if I have it in a personal calendar, I can just forward that to community organizations with a little note, like, we're going to be talking about this. And, we would really like feedback. If you want to sign up for public comment, here's the link. Like, it's just, facilitating meetings and working with a bunch of partners. Like, it is so nice to have a calendar and like, respond to emails people have after the fact of like, what do I need to know? How should I prepare? Things like, it's a glorious tool, technology, with that way, in calendars. And I live by calendars.
Well, Jose, I think without any authority, I'm giving you direction to take that on, because I think that would be really useful. Julia.
Yeah, I just, I love the idea. I also understand the challenge. I definitely, though, don't want anyone, Jose included, to spend any time if it's not okay. I don't exactly know. And so if you could give me a minute, I'd like a minute being tomorrow. I'd like to just check maybe in with like the city attorney's office. Sometimes like the city system can have a strange can be challenging to interact with others. Like, I think we can get there. I just don't know if the mechanism you're suggesting is the right one or the best one. So let me just check. Like, yes, we can figure it out. I'm just not sure if it's Google Calendar or not, if that's cool.
Yeah, that's why I said I don't know if it can happen. And it's just I recognize that you can go on our website and see all of our meetings, but then there's all these things that people want us to do that are not necessarily on just ours. So then we have to look somewhere. Like, I'd love to have a calendar where it has all this stuff relevant to us together. That's all. Yeah.
Excellent. Leah, you've got your hand up.
Yes, calendar would be great. In addition to that, I know this is maybe asking a lot, but when we present the plan to GTAC and say that we're going to, if the proposal to have these every 3 months, we're doing educational opportunities in there, I think we should have something about the trainings in there, about when they're going to be, so that people can start to block those off and be putting together some type of all-encompassing presentation or manual about how to do this. Like, you know, how do you plan one of these? How do you invite people? Like, what does it mean to be a facilitator here? How do you represent this group well and make sure that it's like an inclusive, trauma-informed, and good place to be? I'd be happy to volunteer to help Julia or other people to put that together. But I think when we're introducing this to people, if we're saying as of June, they need to start planning some educational opportunities, I think we need to get some materials to them like ASAP about what that means and how to do it.
I completely agree. I'm gonna just say that there just a time check. It's 7:17 on my computer. There's still one more thing I want to make sure that we hammer out, which is, roles within the actual meeting itself. Who is going to do the presentation, create the presentation, that kind of thing. Tabling that for a second so I can hear from Destiny.
Yes, going off of what Leah just said, which is great. I love that. Julia, do you know when that community engagement contract is going to be finalized? Because it would be great to have a standardized kind of thing that we then can be flexible with, right? To be culturally responsive and aware, or, audience context in mind, or, priority. But do you know when that contract will be finalized and that's a resource to us?
I'm sorry, Destiny, I don't know what contract you're referring to.
The one Shoshana brought up yesterday about a community engagement one to help with the communities, right, that are hard to reach.
Okay,
The third
sure.
one.
Yes. So that contract is for voter education. It is to educate hard to reach voters about ranked choice voting ahead of the November 2024 election. Is there some relevancy to what we're talking about? Probably, but I think it's substantially different than what I hear in your question. However, that contract should be signed this fiscal year. So that means by June 30th.
Thank you. Just, yeah. If it's voter education, that means, ahead when elections are coming up and people are questioning about it. So we definitely, like Leah said, we should definitely start thinking about creating materials as a committee. Yes.
Thanks, Destiny. Jane, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I think if I were a regular GTAC member and not one of us on this screen right now, given that previous statement of, that will go with the buddy X number of times every 3 months would be a freak out opportunity. I think that we all knew when we came into this that one of our jobs was to educate the community, but it's a very different thing. It's like public speaking. Some people are just fine standing up and talking, and there are other people who go into the fetal position for 2.5 years beforehand. So I think that what we have to do is not that we're going to have all of the answers here, but when we make this presentation, is to say we're only going to put you in very safe, comfortable spot with a whole bunch of materials, and we'll give you training in advance. So, when I worked at the port, and we used to have port staff go out into the community And we train them, we'd give them a kit, we'd give them a little presentation, and we'd give them fun handouts, and we'd have them practice, and then they would go, and then they would come back, and they'd quite liked it. Then the second time they went, they really liked it. So I think we have to say very comforting things like, we're only going to put you in a situation that you're going to enjoy. So for instance, I would give my back teeth to go to every high school that had a civics class and talk to high schoolers. I mean, I would be so happy doing that. And I would go 4 times a week to cover that, because that would be something I would find really fun. And they've been totally left out. You know, young voters never talked to. So I think that that's what we need to say is we're not going, it's not going to be difficult. We're only going to put you in places that you're going to enjoy. You probably have connections with people. That's who we want you to go and talk to. So if you're a Rotary Club member, let's send you off to Rotaries or whatever that is. But I do think we have to calmly say, you get to have this opportunity, not that you will do it, you get to have this amazing opportunity to share this information with people, and we're not going to put you in a terrible situation. So I just think that, and I think that when we layer equity training, if people who haven't done it could be a bit wary of that too. So I think we have to be very, very gentle and reassuring.
Thanks, Jane. Destiny.
Thank you, Jane. I do want to point out, you know, those organizations and that, you know, list of people we want to reach out to. Like, you can definitely pick out of those, you know, plentiful of lists of who you want to engage with. But I do want to still be cautionary of trying to prioritize our comfort when this is clearly a reaction to a lot of people's discomfort or lack of, you know, acknowledgement. And I think, you know, in order to become comfortable, you do need those equity trainings, right? And I would prioritize making sure, because this was all voluntary, right? Like that we all stepped up to engage in this work, and we need to be bold and courageous enough to follow it through. But if, you know, people are comfortable in certain spaces, I think that list provides plenty of opportunities for someone to be comfortable and safe, and, you know, pick a role that makes them comfortable and safe, but also be aware that, you know, we're here as a result of people wanting more safety for themselves or wanting to point out when city has not been acknowledging and safe to other voters as well, or communities or districts and things like that.
And I agree with that, but I do know that in order to get us there, we have to give people an opportunity to practice this in areas that they are the most comfortable with first and feel success, and then encourage them to go to areas of slight discomfort. And so, I mean, that's really how you train people to sort of like do new things. I'm totally with you. And I think we want to ask people to be bold, but I think we want to say, you will be given training, you will be given materials, you will have training wheels, and go to a couple of places where you feel really comfortable, and then another opportunity where maybe you're not. Because what we want is for people to be enthusiastic about this and not going on vacation for 3 months, or telling us they're going on vacation for 3 months because we're a bit scared.
Okay, well, thank you for that conversation. We've got 5 minutes left. I think there's still things that we need to kind of hammer out here in a very quick order. So I do want, you know, flagging that we need to maybe craft a message that will support Julia, so that Julia is not necessarily the one tasked to putting a message together that connects the resources that we're providing prior to the meeting. I think is probably really valuable. And maybe we can have a shared space or a document where we can work on that language with you, Julia. I want to make sure that we have a identified person to present for 620. If there are any volunteers for the presentation side of things. Jane. Oh, you're on mute. No worries.
Sorry, maybe if it's a PowerPoint presentation, that each one of us could take a couple of slides and speak to that so that the whole team is talking and there's not just one voice.
Okay. Jose?
Yeah, I was gonna say it's hard to volunteer for this because I don't even know exactly what we're gonna present on. So I would be happy to help come up with a presentation and present if needed, or we can do all take a piece, whatever it takes, but I will help with whatever we need
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, you need more clarity. I think that's clear and that's understandable. Julia, you've got your hand up.
I was gonna give a little bit more clarity, probably still unsatisfactory, but there's 30 minutes on the agenda for this topic, right? So I think, you don't want to be talking at the committee for the majority of that time, right? So we want to send out the draft engagement plan. I think it was Juanita, we want to send out the key questions. We want people just to be pondering in their heads. We'll create a short slide deck that hits on the key elements that you want to talk about. I don't think each of you does a slide. There's way too many of you, which I love, side note, right? There's a couple people, 1 to 2 people deliver the information, and then we engage in a group conversation. What exactly those questions are beyond what we've talked about, that's what I don't want to develop on my own, because we've had so much great conversation, but I'd love a couple partners who will, help me put together, we're talking a handful or less of slides. And then I think it's better to have the work, like peers present to the full committee rather than have it be staff led. Thanks.
And Destiny has put in kind of a recommendation, 10 minutes with 20 minutes for a presentation, 20 minutes for discussion. I think there's general agreement around that. Jose, you had your hand up for a hot second, but I think were you nominating yourself?
Yeah, I was just volunteering to.
Great.
To come up with that.
Excellent. Do I have somebody who would like to join Jose in presenting? Okay. Well, without one, I will I'm happy to be second. I've been facilitating and working with Julia, so happy to do that. But thanks, Shane. Okay, so we've got our presenters. We'll work on the presentation. I think there's probably reality-wise, like we've got things that we may want to go back and forth on to share with you all before we actually do the presentation and or share with the regular whole advisory team. So we'll need to huddle about getting kind of some slides together. Fortunately, I think we've got a lot of it already pre-created, but maybe some general talking points and embodying what Destiny was saying, embodying what Jane was saying, I think are really valuable things to elevate in the conversation so that it's a healthy discussion. And Terry, thank you, appreciate it. We are at 7:30. We haven't gone through full next steps, the proposed upcoming schedule and getting us to adjourn. So maybe Julia, do you have you unmuted
No,
yourself?
I'm happy to do maybe a really quick run through of next steps. I think we can probably skip the upcoming schedule since it's a repeat of the upcoming schedule I shared with you at the beginning.
Yeah.
I do want to say, again, this meeting is being recorded. Thank you so much for the conversation. It'll probably be online tomorrow. Thank you to Zach for facilitating tonight. Our third work group meeting is scheduled for Monday, June 26, 6 to 7:30. Does somebody want to volunteer to play the role that Zach played tonight, that Amy played at our first meeting? It's not scary. I promise.
Fresh blood.
I'll volunteer to take the next one, not the next June 26th, the one after that, if someone else takes June 26th. I have a meeting from 5 to 6 on the 26th, so I can't do it because I might be late. But
I don't know if there is another one. So
There
right
is
now,
not. So I'll lead it. That's fine. I'll lead it. I'll just get it over with.
okay, thank you.
No more
Zach,
pausing.
again. So then I have just really quick. So Leah, Terry, Jane, and Zach are going to help populate that kind of new column we're going to add to the calendar and the draft engagement plan. I'll share that out with you all. Jose and Zach are going to help me create the presentation and do the presenting on June 20th. Does anyone just want to give a review to the draft engagement plan in its entirety? I'm going to do some updating kind of based on tonight's conversation, but just Juanita, I see your hand. Anyone else? Bill? Okay, fantastic.
Can I know there's always a challenge of too many cooks in the kitchen with this stuff, Julia, but would it be okay if we shared it with the full work group so that we have a chance to read it over and provide some feedback? I think, we're also probably, I don't want to reserve for only 4 people with this, like adding new content that we would then share a draft before the rest of the transition. So maybe we can have those two as like shared across the entirety of this work
You
group.
all already have access. I'll reshare it out. But I guess I would like a couple people who really can commit to taking a look. So it isn't like Julia wrote this and it isn't, but I'm really going to be like, is this reflective of the work group conversation where we landed? It's not oh wait, what about this thing? Because that then becomes a larger conversation. Again, this is not the final iteration, right? There's multiple iterations in the future. What I really will ask then you to do is limit yourselves at this point to like, does this reflect the conversations that we've had thus far? Minus the calendaring additions that the 4 of you are doing.
I think that's great. I think maybe just from a tech solution is you can just provide a comment of the like paragraphs section or whatever that you want us to focus our attention on. And that way we know where we're so we're not re-reviewing a 20-page document or whatever it is. Like we're really intentionally focusing on what we accomplished today and what we're going to add to with that column for our future draft. Destiny, you've got your hand up.
The way I'm kind of interpreting Julia's request is kind of like when David and Lori helped, revise and resend the bylaws and the working agreements, with those red things, going back over the notes and like giving them a tweak and sending it back to the group to just verify that it's representative. Am I like interpreting what you're asking right, Julia?
Yes, thank you, Destiny.
Yes, that's better. That's better.
Yeah, that's better than both of us.
That's better. That's thank you for that. And let's just structure that way of sharing it. So it's going to be like essentially a PDF or something that's not necessarily editable, but it's going to have the line item edits of what has been changed to reflect. And is that closer to what we're talking about? No, we still want to be able to edit ourselves.
No, I think what Julia was talking about when she did it with David and Lori, and I imagine that was a lot of behind the scenes work and conversations and, in between editing, and then just sending it back to be like, is this like this is what the feedback was, and then we approved those as a committee once we got like their hard work of revising it. And I'm happy to help too, Julia, with Juanita to go back and wordsmith that and then send it back to this working group as well.
Yeah, I just want to, I just want to kind of make sure that we're clear about what we're talking about. there's going to be other reiterations of the document. This document is going to be submit to the full committee, and they will do more iterations, and they will probably will make more changes, and it will come back to us again. So this is just, yeah, just like Destiny was describing it. So we'll be working with Julia on it. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Somehow I got all confused too.
Yeah, no, I as long as Julia has some clarity on what she needs. Okay. Excellent. Anything else on this next steps? I think we've covered everything. I've taken additional time off of a consecutive night. So thank you all for your participation tonight. It was really a pleasure to be able to have a really interesting conversation and discussion. And I look forward to being able to represent you all with alongside Jose at our next meeting of this work. And we will continue to make progress. I love it. Thanks. Meeting adjourned.